The year was 26 CE. A boy, barely 12 years old, stood on a boat crossing the Bay of Naples. 3 weeks ago, he'd been sold at a slave market in Ephesus. They told him he'd serve the emperor's household. Nothing more. The island of Capri emerged from the water ahead. Jagged cliffs shot up 200 feet, cutting off any escape. At the top sat Villa Jovis, the palace of Emperor Tiberius, second ruler of Rome. The boy didn't know it yet. He would never leave this island alive. What happened to him here wouldn't surface for centuries. Tiberius Claudius Nero didn't begin as a monster. When Augustus chose him as successor in 4 CE, Rome gained a proven military commander. He'd conquered Germania, secured the Danube frontier, and earned respect through discipline rather than charisma. His early reign from 14 to 26 CE showed competence. The treasury swelled. The provinces stayed stable. The Senate functioned without major disruption. But Tiberius never wanted the throne. Augustus had only turned to him after the deaths of his preferred heirs. This reluctant emperor carried resentment like a wound that never healed. He trusted no one, suspected everyone, and withdrew deeper into himself with each passing year. The death of his son, Drusus, in 23 CE, shattered what remained of his restraint. Poison was suspected, never proven. Tiberius blamed the Senate, blamed the aristocracy, blamed Rome itself. Treason, he muttered at every perceived slight. They plot against me at every turn. He began seeing conspiracy in every letter, betrayal in every whisper. The maiestas laws, treason statutes originally meant to protect the state, became weapons to destroy anyone who questioned his authority. Lucius alias Sejanus, commander of the Praetorian Guard, saw opportunity in the emperor's paranoia. He fed Tiberius reports of plots, real and imagined. "Caesar, I've uncovered another conspiracy," Sejanus would say, laying documents before the emperor. 3 senators were overheard, speaking against you. Senators disappeared after private conversations. Equestrians found themselves accused based on nothing more than rumor. Sejanus positioned himself as the only person Tiberius could trust, the only filter between the emperor and a hostile world. By 26 CE, Tiberius had had enough. The Senate exhausted him. The plebs disgusted him. Every face in Rome seemed to hide a dagger. So he left, not for a summer villa or temporary retreat, but permanently. He abandoned the capital of the empire and withdrew to Capri, a rocky island 4 miles off the coast of Campania. The Senate couldn't believe it. An emperor who refused to govern from Rome. It was unprecedented. But Tiberius didn't care about precedent. "Let them squawk," he reportedly said. "Sejanus will handle Rome. The empire will function without me physically present." What the Senate didn't understand, what no one in Rome could have predicted, was that Tiberius wasn't simply retreating from politics. He was abandoning the last restraints that civilization imposed on him. In Rome, eyes were everywhere. Senators watched, citizens gossiped, even the palace walls had ears. But Capri offered something Rome could never provide: absolute privacy. No Senate to judge him, no citizens to witness his choices, no moral authority to answer to except his own. The journey from respected commander to isolated tyrant was complete. And on that island, far from laws and consequences, Tiberius would become something far worse than a bad emperor. He would become unaccountable. Capri rises from the Tyrrhenian Sea like a natural fortress. 4 miles long, barely a mile across, the island presents sheer limestone cliffs on nearly all sides. Only one safe landing exists: Marina Grande, a small harbor on the northern coast. Every other approach ends in rocks or vertical walls dropping straight into deep water. Tiberius exploited this geography deliberately. Across the island, he constructed 12 separate villas. Each occupied a strategic position: cliff edges, hilltops, coastal promontories. Guards could see approaching vessels miles before they arrived. Signal fires could communicate between compounds instantly. Anyone attempting to reach the emperor without permission would be spotted long before landing. Villa Jovis dominated them all. Built on the eastern tip of the island, it sat 200 feet above sea level. The complex covered nearly 7,000 square meters, sprawling across multiple terraces carved into the mountainside. On 3 sides, the ground simply ended. No walls were needed where a sheer drop provided better security than any fortification. The villa's design revealed its true purpose. Water systems, massive and elaborate, ensured the estate could survive indefinitely without mainland supplies. Separate residential wings isolated different groups. Family quarters, guest chambers, staff housing, and private rooms accessible only through guarded passages. The emperor could move through his palace without ever being seen by anyone he didn't wish to encounter. Entry to Villa Jovis required navigating a single steep path. Guards checked every visitor against approved lists. Sejanus controlled those lists. No senator, no magistrate, not even family members could speak to Tiberius without explicit permission granted in advance. The emperor had transformed himself into something unreachable, a god hidden behind stone and distance. The crossing from the mainland reinforced this isolation. 3 miles of open water separated Capri from Sorrento. The currents ran unpredictably. Storms could trap vessels for days. Even in calm weather, small boats struggled against the winds funneling through the bay. For anyone brought to the island against their will, the sea became an impossible barrier. Swimming was suicide. No boat left without imperial authorization. The guards ensured compliance. Hundreds of enslaved workers maintained the estate. Cooks, cleaners, gardeners, builders, and personal attendants. They lived in dedicated quarters built into the lower terraces of the villa complex. Their movements were restricted, their interactions monitored. Information could not leak if no one ever left to carry it. Within Villa Jovis itself, certain rooms remained mysteries even to most household staff. Hidden chambers accessible through concealed doors, private bathhouse with separate entrances, wings that visitors never saw, where silence was enforced absolutely. The villa's layout created zones of increasing secrecy, each layer protected by guards who reported directly to Sejanus or the emperor himself. This was not a retreat. It was a machine designed to enable secrecy. Every architectural choice, every guard post, every controlled pathway served one purpose: to create a space where Tiberius could do anything he wished without witnesses, without judgment, without consequence. The grandeur of the marble columns and painted fresco concealed the villa's true function. It was a cage built by the emperor to imprison others. And once inside those walls, escape became impossible. The cliffs, the sea, and the guards ensured that whatever happened on Capri stayed on Capri. No voices would carry across that water. No evidence would survive. The island would keep its secrets. The Roman slave markets operated with brutal efficiency. In cities across the empire, Delos, Ephesus, Alexandria, Rome itself, human beings were displayed like livestock. Children stood in rows, their bodies examined by buyers who checked teeth, skin, and build with clinical detachment. "Turn around," a buyer would command. "Open your mouth. Let me see your hands." Scribes documented every detail in inventory lists: age, origin, physical characteristics, special qualities. The imperial household had specific requirements. Agents working for Tiberius searched for boys between the ages of 10 and 15. They prioritized certain physical traits that Roman aristocratic culture prized: lighter complexion, delicate features, hairless bodies, graceful movements. These qualities were described in procurement records with disturbing precision. One inventory from the period lists a boy as having gratis grace of body and notes his sale price at 4 times the standard rate. Geography mattered. Slaves from the Greek East, Syria, and parts of Asia Minor commanded higher prices in these specific categories. Roman buyers believed these regions produced more refined appearances. Gaul and Germania provided different types of slaves valued for different purposes. For Tiberius's needs, eastern provinces dominated the supply. The economics were staggering. A typical agricultural slave might cost 500 denarii. A skilled craftsman could fetch 2,000. But boys matching the imperial criteria sold for 6,000 denarii or more. For slave dealers, supplying the emperor's household meant enormous profit. They actively searched for inventory that met these specifications, sometimes traveling to provincial markets specifically to acquire suitable children. Not all came through purchase. Provincial governors seeking imperial favor sometimes sent gifts to Capri. These children of freed men or provincials were presented as tokens of loyalty, young attendants for the emperor's household. Once delivered, their previous status became irrelevant. On Capri, no legal protection survived the journey. Freeborn or slave, the distinction vanished inside those villa walls. Conquest provided another source. When legions subdued a province, the aftermath always included slave-taking. Officers selected captives based on age and appearance, setting aside certain children for specialized markets rather than selling them in bulk. These selections were not random. The officers knew what types of slaves brought premium prices and where to sell them. Transport from eastern markets to Italy took weeks. The classis missinensis, Rome's naval fleet based at Misenum near Naples, occasionally provided discreet vessels for imperial purposes. Children traveled aboard well-appointed ships, their journey concealed beneath bureaucratic language. Manifest documents listed them as household attendants or musicians for the imperial court. The terminology served its purpose, obscuring their actual destination and fate. Imperial agents oversaw the process with meticulous care. Before departure, selected children underwent initial preparation. They learned basic Latin if they spoke only Greek or Aramaic. They received instruction in proper behavior when addressing superiors. "You will speak only when spoken to," an instructor would say. "You will move silently. You will respond instantly to commands." This preliminary training began before they ever saw Capri. The numbers are difficult to establish with certainty. A villa complex the size of Jovis required hundreds of enslaved workers for basic operations. Among these, sources suggest Tiberius maintained a smaller specialized group for his personal service. Suetonius indicates dozens rather than hundreds. Over the 11 years Tiberius spent on Capri, the total likely reached into the scores, perhaps more. Each boy had a life before the markets: a family in Antioch, a village in Galatia, a farm outside Ephesus. Those lives ended the moment they were sold. Their names were replaced with Roman designations or simple descriptive labels. Their origin ceased to matter except as markers of value in a transaction. The procurement system reveals something essential. This was not impulsive cruelty. It was organized, systematic, economic. A supply chain existed to fill this demand. Dealers specialized in it. Agents knew what to look for and where to find it. Money flowed through the system in predictable patterns. Ships carried children across the Mediterranean on regular schedules. The empire's bureaucratic machinery, the same system that built aqueducts and maintained roads, devoted resources to acquiring children for the emperor's villa. The operation had structure, logistics, and record-keeping. What happened on Capri was not the aberration of one disturbed mind. It was enabled by an entire apparatus that functioned smoothly, efficiently, and without moral hesitation. The boat reached Marina Grande at dawn. Guards pulled the children onto the dock, checking manifests against the expected arrivals. From the harbor, a steep path climbed toward Villa Jovis. The boys walked in single file, surrounded by attendants who spoke little and explained nothing. The ascent took hours. By the time they reached the villa's outer gates, the mainland had disappeared behind them. Inside the complex, they were separated immediately. Any children who had traveled together were divided, placed in different sections of the household quarters. This separation was deliberate. Friendships meant loyalty to someone other than the emperor. Isolation prevented bonds from forming, kept each boy dependent solely on those who controlled his survival. The quarters designated for their housing occupied a lower terrace of Villa Jovis. Stone rooms 12 feet square with narrow windows facing the sea. Each space held 4 to 6 boys. Sleeping pallets lined the walls. A single oil lamp provided light after sunset. The doors locked from the outside. Training began within days of arrival. Older attendants, enslaved men who had served the household for years, conducted the initial instruction. "Listen carefully," they would say in Greek and Latin both, ensuring every boy understood regardless of his origin. Your life depends on learning quickly. The curriculum covered practical skills first: how to move silently through corridors, how to stand motionless for hours, how to anticipate needs without being asked. Performance arts came next. Boys learned to sing following instruction from a household musician. They practiced movements that mimicked dancers, developing grace and fluidity. They memorized verses from Greek poetry and learned to recite them with proper emphasis. These skills were presented as entertainment training, preparation for serving at imperial banquets and gatherings. But other lessons revealed darker purposes. The boys learned to read facial expressions, to detect shifts in mood from the smallest gesture. They studied the emperor's preferences, his patterns, his anger triggers. This knowledge was survival instruction. Understanding when Tiberius was pleased or displeased could mean the difference between favor and punishment. Obedience training was absolute. Questions were forbidden. Hesitation brought immediate correction. When the emperor speaks, you move, an attendant would bark. No thought, no resistance, only obedience. The boys learned to respond to commands instantly. Older attendants demonstrated the consequences of failure: scars on their backs, missing fingers, the haunted expressions of those who had survived years in this household. Grooming consumed hours each day. Bodies were oiled until skin gleamed. Hair was trimmed and arranged according to specific styles. Nails were cleaned and filed. The boys were taught to move in ways that emphasized their youth, to stand in poses that displayed their forms to advantage. This presentation wasn't vanity. It was requirement. Daily routines followed strict schedules: waking at dawn, washing in cold water from the cisterns, exercises to maintain flexibility and appearance. Midday brought training sessions. Afternoons involved rehearsals of whatever performances were planned. Evenings meant preparation for potential summons to the emperor's private quarters. A hierarchy existed among the boys. Those who pleased Tiberius gained small privileges: better food, warmer blankets, freedom from certain tasks. This system created competition, prevented solidarity. Each boy learned that his survival depended on satisfying the emperor's desires better than the others. The training period varied. Some boys were deemed ready within weeks. Others required months before they were considered sufficiently prepared. Readiness was determined by the older attendants who reported to Sejanus's trusted lieutenants. No boy knew when his training would end and his actual service would begin. The moment of first presentation to Tiberius came without warning. A guard would arrive, select a boy, and lead him through corridors to private chambers most household slaves never entered. What happened during these initial encounters wasn't discussed. The boys who returned said nothing. Whether from fear, shame, or strict prohibition, silence was absolute. This was the system, not chaotic cruelty, but organized exploitation, refined through repetition, enforced through terror. By the time a boy stood before the emperor, his will had been methodically broken, his identity erased, his purpose reduced to a single function. The training transformed children into instruments, and Villa Jovis operated this machinery with cold efficiency. Suetonius, writing 80 years after Tiberius's death, recorded allegations that still disturb. He claimed the emperor surrounded himself with young boys he called pisciculae, little fishes. The term itself carried meaning in Roman culture. It referred to those who performed intimate acts in bathhouses and private settings, a euphemism understood by anyone familiar with elite Roman practices. According to Suetonius, these boys were trained to perform while Tiberius bathed. The emperor's private bathhouse at Villa Jovis featured marble pools fed by the complex cistern system. Here, away from any witnesses, the boys would swim between his legs, their actions described in terms that leave no ambiguity about their purpose. Suetonius states that they were instructed to nibble and lick, while Tiberius reclined in the water. The account continues with even more disturbing details. Suetonius describes infants and toddlers brought to the emperor, their mouths used in ways that defy any attempt at euphemistic description. He frames these as Tiberius's invention, practices the emperor developed during his years of isolated power on Capri. Tacitus, more restrained in his writing, confirms the broader pattern without Suetonius's explicit details. In his annals, Tacitus notes that Tiberius's retreat to Capri spawned rumors of secret orgies and behaviors that even in old age he couldn't abandon. While Tacitus avoids graphic specifics, he clearly indicates that contemporaries believed something deeply inappropriate occurred on that island. The performances extended beyond the bathhouse. Banquets at Villa Jovis became theaters of exploitation. Boys were displayed during feasts, dressed in minimal clothing or sometimes nothing at all. They served wine, reclined beside guests, and performed dances between courses. The entertainment was designed to blur boundaries, to normalize behavior that would have been scandalous in Rome. Mythological reenactments provided further cover for exploitation. The boys would portray figures from Greek legends, Ganymede and Zeus, Hyacinthus and Apollo, other stories where gods took young male lovers. These performances allowed Tiberius to frame his desires in cultural terms, to present exploitation as artistic expression. Roman aristocratic culture had long romanticized Greek practices, and the emperor weaponized this acceptance. Guests who visited Capri, always carefully selected by Sejanus, witnessed these displays. Their complicity was guaranteed through participation. Once they had attended such entertainments, they became implicated. Any senator who later criticized the emperor could be reminded of his presence at these events, his silence interpreted as approval. The frequency of these activities is difficult to establish. Suetonius suggests they were regular, perhaps even nightly. Tacitus implies they occurred throughout Tiberius's residence. On Capri, but doesn't specify patterns. What both sources agree on is that these weren't isolated incidents. This was sustained behavior over years. Boys who failed to please faced immediate consequences. Those who resisted, who showed reluctance or disgust, were removed from service. Their fates varied, but few outcomes were merciful. Some were reassigned to brutal labor, maintaining the villa grounds. Others disappeared entirely, their absence explained away, if anyone dared to ask. The emperor's preferences evolved over time. Suetonius suggests that as Tiberius aged, his demands became more extreme. What had begun as exploitation of adolescents expanded to include younger children, then infants. Whether this progression was accurate or represented Suetonius's desire to portray escalating depravity remains debated. But the core allegation that Tiberius used enslaved boys for his gratification appears in multiple sources. The question of source reliability deserves consideration. Suetonius wrote during the reign of Hadrian, decades after Tiberius's death. He never witnessed these events personally. His sources included lost memoirs, court gossip, and oral traditions passed down through aristocratic families. Some historians argue he exaggerated to satisfy readers hungry for scandal. Yet Tacitus, writing earlier and more carefully, independently confirms the essence of the accusations. He may have avoided graphic details out of taste rather than disbelief. Other contemporary references, though fragmentary, suggest that Romans of the period believed these stories. The Senate never investigated after Tiberius's death. But absence of inquiry doesn't mean absence of truth. It may simply reflect that everyone involved wanted the matter buried. The cultural context complicates modern understanding. Roman aristocratic culture accepted certain forms of exploitation that would be criminal by any modern standard. Enslaved individuals, particularly boys, existed in a legal category that denied them bodily autonomy. What happened on Capri wasn't unique because it occurred, but because of its scale and the emperor's direct involvement. Other Roman elites maintained similar arrangements. Wealthy households kept young slaves specifically for intimate purposes. The practice was known, tacitly accepted among the aristocracy, and rarely discussed publicly. Tiberius's behavior was perhaps more extreme, more systematic, more isolated from social constraints. But it existed along a spectrum of exploitation that Roman law permitted and Roman culture normalized. The boys themselves left no records. Their voices are absent from the historical accounts. We know them only through the descriptions of their abusers and the historians who documented those abuses. Their individual experiences, their suffering, their resistance or resignation, all of it disappeared into the silence that Capri enforced. Lucius alias Sejanus understood power better than any man of his generation. As prefect of the Praetorian Guard, he commanded the only armed force stationed in Rome itself. When Tiberius retreated to Capri in 26 CE, Sejanus became the empire's effective ruler. Every message to the emperor passed through his hands. Every visitor to the island required his approval. This control was absolute. Senators who wanted to communicate with Tiberius wrote letters to Sejanus first, requesting permission to send correspondence. Provincial governors seeking guidance on policy submitted their questions to the prefect, who decided which deserved imperial attention. Even family members found themselves subject to Sejanus's gatekeeping. The emperor's isolation was physical, but Sejanus made it bureaucratic as well. The prefect used this position ruthlessly. Tacitus records how Sejanus intercepted messages that might have informed Tiberius of problems in Rome, reports of unrest, complaints about Praetorian misconduct. warnings about Sejanus' own growing power. These communications never reached Capri. The emperor heard only what his prefect wanted him to hear. In return, Sejanus protected Tiberius' secrets. Any rumor about activities on Capri could be traced to its source. Those who whispered faced treason charges. The maiestas laws, already expanded under Tiberius, became weapons to silence anyone who questioned what occurred on that island. I heard disturbing things about the emperor, a senator might confide to a friend. Within days, that senator would find himself accused of spreading sedition. Senators learned quickly. Speculation about the emperor's private life meant exile or execution. Sejanus cultivated a network of informers throughout Rome. Slaves reported on their masters. Clients betrayed their patrons. Freed men sold information about household conversations. This surveillance system ensured that no one could organize opposition or spread damaging stories without Sejanus knowing immediately. The prefect maintained files, documents listing who said what and when. The relationship between Tiberius and Sejanus was symbiotic. The emperor needed someone he could trust absolutely to manage Rome, while he indulged himself on Capri. Sejanus needed the emperor's authority to advance his own ambitions. Each man enabled the other's worst impulses. The arrangement worked perfectly until it didn't. Letters between them survived in fragments, copied by later historians. The correspondence reveals how they coordinated. Tiberius would request certain individuals be sent to Capri. Sejanus would arrange transportation and ensure the journey remained discreet. When the emperor wanted someone eliminated, Sejanus handled the logistics. The paper trail connects them directly to the machinery of exploitation and murder. By 31 CE, Sejanus had overreached. He sought to marry into the imperial family, positioning himself as potential successor. Tiberius, paranoid by nature, began receiving warnings that his prefect planned to seize power. Whether these warnings were accurate or manufactured by Sejanus' enemies remains unclear. What matters is that Tiberius believed them. The emperor acted with characteristic ruthlessness. From Capri, he sent orders for Sejanus' arrest. The prefect was seized during a Senate meeting, charged with treason, and executed the same day. His family was killed. His supporters were hunted down. Within weeks, the entire network Sejanus had built was destroyed. Yet Tiberius made no effort to address what Sejanus had helped conceal. No investigation examined activities on Capri. No inquiry questioned what the prefect had been protecting. The emperor eliminated the man who knew too much, but he preserved the system that had enabled his behavior. Sejanus' fall changed everything in Rome and nothing on Capri. The eastern edge of Villa Jovis ended abruptly. No wall, no railing, just a sheer drop of 1,200 feet straight down to the rocks below. The sea crashed against the base, churning white foam around jagged limestone. This cliff had a name among the household slaves: Salto di Tiberio, the Tiberian leap. Suetonius describes the execution method with brutal clarity. When someone displeased the emperor, guards would drag them to the cliff edge. No trial, no formal accusation, no opportunity to speak in defense. The condemned would be hurled over the precipice, their bodies spinning through empty air before smashing into the rocks. But death from the fall wasn't guaranteed. The height and angle meant some survived the initial impact, broken but breathing. Tiberius anticipated this. He stationed a party of Marines at the base of the cliff with specific instructions. They waited in boats, armed with oars and boat hooks. When bodies came down, they beat them until movement ceased. No one would crawl away from the rocks. No one would survive to carry tales back to the mainland. The victims included more than just boys who had aged out of usefulness. Anyone who learned too much, saw too much, or simply became inconvenient found themselves at that cliff edge. Household slaves who whispered among themselves, guards who showed sympathy to the exploited, visiting senators who asked uncomfortable questions. The emperor had discovered that the cliff solved all problems permanently. How many died this way? The sources provide no exact count. Suetonius suggests it was frequent enough that the practice became known throughout the household. Tacitus mentions it as established fact, not isolated incident. The consistency of the accounts across hostile sources suggests this wasn't invention, but documented reality. The boys imprisoned in the villa lived with constant awareness of the cliff. They could see it from their quarters. They heard the screams, brief and quickly swallowed by distance. They watched guards escort someone toward the eastern terrace and knew that person wouldn't return. The cliff was warning and weapon both. Some victims knew their fate was coming. Boys who resisted too openly, who refused commands too many times, would be marked. The older attendants could identify those who had been selected for removal. In the days before execution, these boys would be isolated further, prevented from speaking to others. Then guards would arrive, and the walk to the cliff would begin. Others died without warning. A moment of displeasure during a banquet could be enough. An expression the emperor interpreted as contempt, a hesitation at a command. Tiberius operated without predictable logic. Terror was most effective when no one could anticipate it. When survival seemed entirely dependent on incomprehensible whims. The Marines below became executioners by assignment, not choice. They were soldiers following orders from their supreme commander, but their presence reveals the systematic nature of these killings. This wasn't spontaneous violence. It was procedure, organized and repeated often enough to require dedicated personnel. No bodies were recovered by families. No burials marked their deaths. No records listed their names. They simply vanished, existing one moment and erased the next. The sea carried away whatever remained after the Marines finished their work. The rocks were washed clean by tides. Evidence disappeared as completely as the victims themselves. The cliff still exists today, accessible to tourists who visit the ruins of Villa Jovis. Information plaques describe the history, usually in carefully neutral language. But the drop remains exactly as it was 2,000 years ago, and the rocks below still bear the marks of constant waves, wearing away stone just as they once destroyed bodies thrown from above. By 37 CE, Tiberius had lived on Capri for 11 years. He was 77 years old, ill and increasingly isolated, even from his own household. The energetic cruelty of earlier years had diminished. Whether the exploitation of boys continued at the same intensity during his final months remains unclear. The sources focus on his political paranoia and failing health rather than his private activities. In March of that year, Tiberius left Capri for the mainland. He traveled to a villa near Misenum, the naval base across the bay. The journey itself suggests his condition had deteriorated. He wouldn't have left his fortress island without compelling reason. Within days of arriving at Misenum, the emperor collapsed. His breathing became labored. Consciousness faded. The exact circumstances of his death remain disputed. Tacitus suggests he died naturally, overwhelmed by age and illness. Suetonius offers a darker version, that Macro, the new Praetorian prefect who replaced Sejanus, smothered him with pillows or ordered it done. Another account claims Tiberius recovered briefly, causing panic among those who had already declared him dead and proclaimed his successor. Whatever the truth, Tiberius died on March 16, 37 CE. Caligula, his grandnephew, immediately assumed power. The young emperor had spent considerable time on Capri during Tiberius's residence there. He knew what occurred on that island. He had witnessed the exploitation, perhaps even participated in the household culture. This knowledge shaped his response. Caligula ordered no investigation. No inquiry examined the fate of enslaved children. No accounting documented how many boys had been brought to Capri and what happened to them. The new emperor wanted the entire matter buried, literally and figuratively. His own time on the island had implicated him. Revelation would damage his legitimacy before his reign even began. The boys still living at Villa Jovis when Tiberius died faced uncertain futures. Some may have been freed, though this seems unlikely given what they knew. More probably, they were dispersed across other imperial properties, reassigned to households where their histories wouldn't be questioned. The most dangerous, those who could testify about specific activities, may have been eliminated quietly. The Senate made no formal inquiry either. Senators who had visited Capri, who had attended banquets and witnessed entertainments, had no interest in official investigation. Their complicity would be exposed. Better to let the matter fade into rumor and speculation, to allow time to blur details. Villa Jovis wasn't immediately abandoned. Subsequent emperors used it occasionally, but its association with Tiberius made it uncomfortable. Within decades, it fell into disuse. The elaborate complex crumbled slowly, its hidden chambers and private wings collapsing into rubble. The island returned to quiet, though its reputation never recovered. Suetonius completed the 12 Caesars around 121 CE, approximately 80 years after Tiberius died. He never witnessed the events he described. His sources included imperial archives, lost memoirs, and testimony from freedmen who had served in various imperial households. Some of these informants were old enough to have lived during Tiberius's reign, or to have heard accounts from those who did. The question of reliability haunts his work. Suetonius wrote scandalous biographies because scandals sold books. His accounts of Tiberius, Caligula, and Nero emphasize sexual depravity, cruelty, and excess. Critics argue he exaggerated or even invented details to satisfy readers hungry for disturbing stories about tyrants. Yet Tacitus, writing earlier and with greater restraint, independently confirms the essential pattern. His annals, composed between 100 and 120 CE, describe Tiberius's retreat and the rumors it generated. Tacitus avoids graphic specifics, but clearly indicates contemporaries believed serious misconduct occurred. He notes the emperor's isolation enabled behavior that even in old age he couldn't abandon. This carefully phrased language suggests activities Tacitus considered too disturbing or inappropriate to detail explicitly. The convergence of hostile sources doesn't automatically prove accuracy. Both Tacitus and Suetonius belong to the senatorial class that despised Tiberius for his expansion of treason laws and his contempt for the Senate. Their biases are undeniable. They had political and literary reasons to portray the emperor in the worst possible light. However, certain elements of the story are definitively true. Tiberius did retreat to Capri in 26 CE. He did rule from there until his death 11 years later. Villa Jovis exists, its ruins confirming the architectural features described in the sources. The cliff is real. The isolation was total. These facts provide foundation for the accusations. The sexual exploitation of enslaved boys wasn't unique to Tiberius. Roman aristocratic households routinely kept young slaves for intimate purposes. Legal codes and literary references confirm this practice was widespread among the elite. What distinguishes the Capri allegations is scale, and the emperor's direct involvement at the highest level. of power. The lack of investigation after Tiberius's death is significant. Caligula had every political reason to expose his predecessor's crimes if they were fabricated. Damaging Tiberius would have legitimized his own succession. Instead, Caligula suppressed inquiry. This suggests there was something genuine to hide, something that implicated others still living and powerful. The core allegations appear in multiple independent sources spanning decades. The details vary, but the fundamental claim remains consistent. Tiberius exploited enslaved boys on Capri in ways that shocked even Romans accustomed to institutionalized cruelty. The specific acts Suetonius describes may be embellished. The numbers may be inflated, but the underlying reality seems to have basis in documented fact. We are left with sources that are biased but convergent, accusations that are disturbing but consistent, and a historical context that made such behavior entirely possible within Roman legal and cultural frameworks. Perfect certainty is impossible, but the weight of evidence suggests something terrible happened on that island. Not one name survives. Not one boy who suffered on Capri left a record we can read. No inscription marks their graves because they have no graves. No family registered their deaths because no one notified their families. They existed in official documents only as inventory, as property transferred from one ledger to another. We cannot know precisely how many. The sources suggest dozens over 11 years, perhaps more. Boys arrived regularly, brought by imperial agents from markets across the eastern Mediterranean. They disappeared into the villa, their fates sealed by geography and absolute power. Some died on Capri, their bodies thrown from cliffs or buried in unmarked locations. Others may have survived long enough to be transferred elsewhere when Tiberius died, scattered across the empire to ensure their silence. These were real children. Each had a life before the slave markets, a mother who nursed him, a language he spoke first, a village or city where he played. Those lives ended the moment they were sold and designated for imperial service. Their childhoods became commodities, their bodies reduced to instruments for the pleasure of one man. The fundamental horror lies in the absolute power differential. Tiberius commanded legions, controlled the treasury, could execute anyone with a word. These boys owned nothing, not even themselves. Between them existed the greatest possible imbalance of power, and Capri removed even the minimal restraints that Roman society imposed. This wasn't ancient history's only such atrocity. Rome's empire was built on systematic exploitation. Millions lived and died in bondage. But this specific case endures because it happened at the apex of power, because it was so methodically organized, and because it involved the deliberate abuse of the most vulnerable. The cliffs of Capri still rise from the Tyrrhenian Sea. Tourists visit the ruins of the villa, taking photographs against spectacular views. The island is beautiful, the water impossibly blue, the air Mediterranean perfect. Nothing visible suggests the suffering those stones witnessed, but the rocks remember. The sea that carried away broken bodies still crashes against the base of those cliffs. And somewhere beneath those waves lie the unmarked graves of children whose names we will never know. If this forgotten history moved you, subscribe. Every subscription helps us unearth the next buried truth and fight historical erasure. We refuse to let their voices fade into the dust.